reason that we're talking about a seven-headed red dragon battling a lamb is because we're knee-deep into an apocalyptic letter called Revelation that is chock full of vivid images, vibrant colors, and symbolic numbers that are meant to inform our minds and provoke a response in our spirits. In other words, we're not talking about a red dragon versus a lamb because we believe there's a literal red dragon that's trying to square up with a lamb, right? We're talking about a seven-headed dragon versus a lamb for the same reason that the Matrix talks about a blue pill versus a red pill to symbolize two opposing realities. You guys with me? Right? We're talking about it because it's symbolic for two different realities. The only difference between our conversation today and maybe the Matrix is that the images that we're going to look at in the text today are symbolic for real things. And so on one side of the battle line is we have a seven-headed red dragon that's symbolic for a real enemy known as Satan or the devil, who is on a mission to lead the whole world astray. And on the other side of the battle line is we have a lamb that's symbolic for a Jewish Messiah who died for the sins of the world 2,000 years ago. And again, hopefully if you've been here for some of this conversation, you know why this matters to us. The reason we're talking about this cosmic battle is because Revelation 12 tells us that this battle that was happening in heaven has now spilled into our hood. Right? And so it is here. Revelation 12 says that when the red dragon was cast down, he was enraged. He was not happy, and he was determined to go wage war against the people of God, wage war against those who will hold onto the testimony of Jesus and follow God's command. And so I'm not going to re-preach the whole sermon, but Revelation chapter 13 was really unique because we got to see the aforementioned battle from the POV, if you will, of the red dragon. But I'm so excited this morning because we're going to get to see the battle. We're going to switch the camera angle, and now we're going to get to see this battle from the POV of the Lamb. Is anybody excited to dig into the text today? Let's go. That's a lot of energy for 8:30, man. I love it. Revelation chapter 14. Would love if you turn there if you have a Bible. I say this every single week because it matters. If you don't own a physical Bible, we would love to give you one. I know it's 2025 and everybody's digital. You can pull out the Bible on your phone and it counts the same. But there's just something about the physical Bible. I think it's cool, especially in the culture where we're all so glued to our phones all the time. I think it would be pretty cool once in a while to go back to like the OG thing. Anybody with me on that? Like there's something about the pages. And so no shame if you're on your phone. He says yes in the front row with his phone. Like, yeah, let's go. And so he says, all right, second service, I want to see you up here with a physical. All right, Revelation 14, we good? Can we dive in? We got a lot to cover today. And so the writer here says, then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb. And he was standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. Quick little pop quiz here before we keep reading. And we're going to go Family Feud style this morning. And so you can give the wrong answer and everybody's just going to go, good answer, good answer. Doesn't matter how terrible your answer is. So there's no pressure this morning. Can we do that? Can we do Family Feud style this morning? Okay, awesome. Who is the I in here? Anybody know who's I? It says I. Look, who's I? John. Yeah, give it. Good answer. Come on. Come on. That's great. This is John. Okay, so if you're just joining us, this letter was written by John. John is the one who was looking and doing all the seeing. Next question, and this one should also be a layup because I kind of teased it earlier. But who's the lamb in our story? Who's the lamb? Jesus. Good answer. Come on, guys. You got to. That's how we work. You say, good answer, good answer. Real patronizing. Good answer, good answer. All right? Okay, this next one is maybe not quite so easy. And so, but we're going to give it a try. Who is the 144,000 that John, someone say Jesus, I love it. I didn't even finish the question yet. They're like, Jesus, good answer, right? So John looks and he sees the lamb. We know the lamb is symbolic for Jesus, but he doesn't just see Jesus, right? He sees 144,000 who are with Jesus. And before you answer who they are, I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint because this one's a little bit tricky. But we've already seen these guys before. Okay, so if you were here, especially for volume 1 of this conversation, we've already seen 144,000 before, and we saw them in what I believe is one of the most jaw-dropping, I didn't see that coming scenes in all of Revelation. Can I show you real quick where we saw these guys before? Yeah, cool, maybe. Okay, Revelation chapter 7. That's where we saw them. Okay, if you got a Bible, you can turn there. You don't have to. But I just want to give you a little context, and then we're going to go back to our anchor text. If you go back 7 chapters to Revelation chapter 7, you see right there, that's the title. 144,000 were sealed. Watch what John says. John says, after this, who's I again in the text? John, I saw. You're going to see a lot of see, saw, heard in Revelation, right? Revelation is a series of windows that John is peeking into. And so John in Revelation 7 saying, after this, after what? After what he saw in Revelation chapter 6. If you weren't here for that conversation, this is a real intense one. Because in Revelation chapter 6, Jesus opens the seal that's on the scroll in God's right hand. And what do we see? The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse like come into play. And all of a sudden, the full wrath and judgment of God is unleashed on the world to such a degree that Revelation chapter 6 ends with people literally begging and pleading for the mountains to fall on them because they were convinced that that would be better than for them to face the full wrath of God, right? Not a very fun ending to a chapter, but after all of that, after that agonizing and tragic scene, John saw something else. He says in 7, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth to prevent any wind from blowing on the land and on the sea or on any tree. Then he says, I saw another angel. We're going to see a lot of angels in our text today coming from the east, having the seal of the living God. And this angel called out, John says, in a loud voice to the other 4 angels who had been given power to harm the sea and the land. And the angel said this, do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. There's so much happening in this text that I think we covered a lot of it the last time we went through it. But simply put, right, there is judgment coming. The wrath of God is being poured out in the end times on the earth. And John is just letting us know that when the God's wrath is being poured out onto earth, not everybody's going to have to face the wrath of God. There are actually going to be some people who are going to be saved from the wrath of God. There are going to be people who are going to be able to stand on the day that God pours out his judgment on earth. And you're like, who in the world are these people? John tells us in verse 4. He says, then I heard the number of those who were sealed. 144,000 from the tribes of Israel. And so, you guys tracking? John sees this crazy vision in Revelation 6, and it's just like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and the wrath of God, and it's like, wow, this is tragic, it's agonizing, this is weighty. And then all of a sudden, John heard that there's going to be 144,000 that are going to be sealed and saved, if you will, from the wrath of God. And then he tells us who they are. He says, from the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. From the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, 12,000. The tribe of Asher, 12,000. The tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. The tribe of Manasseh, 12,000. The tribe of Simeon, 12,000. The tribe of Levi, the tribe of Issachar. Does anybody know? Another pop quiz time, I guess. What do all of these people have in common? These guys right here being named. What do they have in common? Who are they? How are they connected? Anybody know? The what? Someone? The sons of Jacob. Right? And so these 12 sons in this passage mentioned here, and we got Zebulun, we got Joseph, we got Benjamin. If you're not familiar with the story, there's a guy named Jacob in the Old Testament whose name was changed to what? Israel, right? And he had 12 sons, okay? And this is really fascinating. But the 12 sons, we know, of Jacob, right, formed what? The 12 tribes, right? And the 12 tribes formed what? The nation of what? Israel, right? And the prophecy was that the Messiah was going to come from the nation of Israel. You guys tracking? Right? So we got this guy named Jacob. He's got 12 sons. His 12 sons represented the 12 tribes, and the 12 tribes made up the nation of Israel from whom Jesus was going to come. It's like Voltron, right? The 5 lions come together. Anybody know Voltron? No? Okay. How about this? It's like the 50 states of the United States come together. The farm, is that better? Do you guys like that better? Right? It's like come in together. Okay, you prefer Voltron. All right, just wasn't sure. Half the room didn't know who Voltron was, right? But you put all the sons and the tribes together, it forms the nation of Israel. Now, if you're a student of the Old Testament, maybe you're a nerd, you may already know this or not, but the number 12 Biblically speaking, again, this is an apocalypse, right? Numbers are symbolic. The number 12 in the Old Testament is symbolic either for a governing authority, or a lot of theologians believe that it's the number of completeness, the number 12. And so what's happening in this text, again, I know this is so different to our Western mind, but I think it's pretty cool, is that when you take the number of completeness, right, and so you take 12,000 from all the tribes and you multiply it by the number of completeness, what do you get? 144,000. You guys tracking? And so you got 12 as the number of completeness. You take 12,000 from 12 tribes. That's how we get 144,000. Now, here is where things get super fun and interesting and relatable to you, because you're going, what in the world does this have to do with my life in 2025? I'm glad you asked. I'd love to tell you. You know how the 12 sons of Israel or Jacob represent an entire nation? Come to find out, the 144,000 in this text are actually representative of the complete community of people who are going to be saved by the Jewish Messiah who is going to come out of Israel. And how do we know that? We know that because in this text, this is so amazing. I love this text. In the text, the writer tells us in verse 4 that I what? What's this word? Heard. And so he heard that the number of those who were sealed were what? 144,000. But when he looked, he saw something completely different. He says, after this, I looked. And what does he see? He says, there before me was a great, somebody say multitude. A great multitude. Watch this. He says, that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, language, all standing before the throne, before the Lamb. They're wearing white robes. They're holding palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, so shall it be, amen. Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. Question, why in the world did John hear 144,000 are going to be sealed, but when he looked, he saw a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tongue, tribe, and language? Answer, because a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, was the global and ultimate fulfillment of God's plan to redeem the world through a Jewish Messiah that was going to come from the 12 tribes of Israel. You guys with me? And so when he hears 144,000, the scripture is not saying that only 144,000 people are going to be saved when it's all said and done. No, what's happening in Revelation here is that this 144,000 in the text are actually symbolic and a representation of the multitudes and the multitudes of people who are going to be redeemed by the Lamb. So he heard 144,000, but when he looked, guess what he saw? He saw you. He saw me. Can you imagine? Just think about this. Okay, I know some of you guys were really impressed when you went to the big house or the horseshoe and it was you and 100,000 other crazy fans standing singing the fight song. Can you imagine what this is going to be like when it's all said and done? Standing with a multitude that no one could count, from every nation on earth. Japan, Nigeria, Kenya, Israel, Iraq, Chad. It's my favorite country because I didn't know for a long time there's a country named Chad. I'm like, I love it. Every nation on earth standing, all singing the same song. Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne. And can you imagine, anybody getting excited? Can you imagine? I know you're like, I don't like crowds. I promise you, it's going to blow your mind. Standing with the great multitude. What an epic scene. Sorry, not sorry for using an Avengers comp, 2 sermons in a row. But it reminds me, I was reading this, and it reminded me of that scene from Endgame. Anybody remember that scene where Captain America, it's the very end. I'm going to ruin it for you guys, but I think the statute of limitation is long past on that. And so if you haven't seen it, sorry. But anybody remember the scene where Captain America is standing there? It's the end, and it's Thanos and the evil army, and he's outnumbered, and he's walking towards Thanos, and you're like, this is not good. And all of a sudden, the portal opens, right, and my man comes in, right? Black Panther shows up, and all of a sudden, Star-Lord comes, and the Guardians come, and everybody in Spider-Man comes, and everybody shows up, and all of a sudden, Captain America's looking, and he's got this army behind him, and he's like, Avengers assemble, and I'm like, oh, God. Anybody else cry in the theater? I was like, oh, gosh, I don't know why I'm crying. I watched it on YouTube 2 days ago just so I could refresh my memory, and I'm like, this is just so good. He's not alone. Listen, that's the scene in Revelation chapter 14. Go back to our anchor text. That's this scene. So, again, the last conversation in Revelation 13, we got to see the battle from the point of view of the dragon and his two beasts, but now we're looking at the battle from the point of view of the Lamb. And all of a sudden, John's going, man, I saw the Lamb, but he wasn't alone. He had 144,000 standing behind him, but we know that the 144,000 is not just 144,000. We know, based on Revelation 7, that the 144,000 is actually a representative of a multitude of people that cannot be counted from every nation, every tribe, and every language. And John wants us to know that this multitude, they all had the Lamb's name and the Father's name written on their forehead as a sign of allegiance, and they are ready to push the darkness back and to fight against the red dragon. What an epic scene. But wait, there is more. Watch what John says in verse 2. I'm so hyped if you guys can't tell. This text is amazing. John says, and then I heard, somebody say heard. He says, I heard what? I heard a sound from heaven. And the sound, he says, was like the roar of rushing waters, and it was like the peal of thunder. The sound I heard, he says, was like that of harpists playing their harps. I've said this so many times during this series. I'll probably say it several more times. But the reason John is talking like a middle school girl from the 90s and using like 10 times in a sentence is because he's trying to describe something that he doesn't have a framework for. So how do you describe something that you've never seen before? The only thing you can do is compare it to something you're familiar with. And so John is not saying that he heard a sound that was rushing waters and thunder and harpists. No, what John is saying here is like, man, I heard a sound like I have never heard before. It's so unfamiliar. This sound was just, he's like, I don't even know how to, he's like, the closest thing I can describe to the sound is it's kind of like, the sound of rushing water and thunder and harpists playing their harps together, right? This is the best description that he could come up with, and we're going to talk more about this later in the series when we start talking about heaven and earth, but I'm just going to throw this out there. If you're one of those people in the room who is secretly worried that you're going to be bored in heaven, you can just put that worry to rest, okay? Because I promise you, heaven on earth is going to blow your mind literally every single second for all of eternity. And one of the many ways that I believe heaven on earth is going to blow our minds, besides obviously being with Jesus, is I think all of our senses are going to be engaged in ways that we never dare believe was possible. Okay, maybe this is just my crazy Nigerian imagination speaking, but just based on what I read when I read Revelation, I just think it's going to be insane. Like, I think we're going to hear sounds when God brings heaven on earth that's going to stop us in our tracks. I think we're going to see colors that are going to be so beautiful, our jaw is going to hit the ground. I think we're going to taste food that's so good, we're going to cry. Amen? Nobody? I was hoping somebody would say amen to that, right? Like, I mean, come on. I think it's going to be amazing. So John sees the Lamb. He sees the multitude that the Lamb has saved. He hears the sound. He tells us in verse 3 that this 144 that have been sealed, they all sang a new song. and they sang it before the throne. If you were here for the conversation, you know in Revelation chapter 4, John got to tour the throne room of heaven. And who was in the throne room of heaven? The four living creatures and the elders. So apparently the backdrop for this battle that we're about to see here is that it's happening around the throne room of God. And so we not only have a lamb and the 144,000 that represent the complete community, but we got the four living creatures and the elders before the throne of God. No one, he says, the writer says, could learn the song except the 144,000 who have been redeemed from the earth. There are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remained virgins. They followed the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths, and they are blameless. Quick little reminder, we talked about this 2 weeks ago, but just in case there's anybody in the room and all of a sudden you're doubting if you're a part of this multitude that's represented by the 144,000 based on this description, you're like, man, lots of lies found in my mouth, and I am definitely not blameless. The reason the text is calling these people blameless is not because they are sinless. Okay, the reason they're blameless is because they've been covered by the Lamb who died on the cross for their sins. Right? Paul, I think it's in 2 Corinthians 5, put it so well. He said, for he who knew no sin, speaking of Jesus, became sin, right? So that we might become the righteousness of God. It's like the movie Freaky Friday. Anybody remember that one? Where the mother and I think there's a sequel coming out. The mother and the daughter switch places. Anybody? No? Nobody's seen that one, right? It's a little bit like that, right? The theological term is substitutionary atonement, which is just a fancy way of saying that when Jesus went on the cross, he took our place and he died for our sin. And when that happened, when we put our faith in Jesus, we now get to take the place of Jesus and we become the righteousness of God. So these people are not blameless because they're sinless. They're blameless because they've been covered by the blood of the Lamb. You guys got it? You with me? Okay, so I'm going to just zoom out and just catch you up to speed because the story's about to take a turn, okay? So we got a battle between two kingdoms, right? You got the dragon and you got the lamb, right? And those are the only two options on the table, by the way. There's no neutral. So if you're not on team lamb, if you've not been redeemed and saved by the lamb, hate to break it to you, you are by default on the side of the dragon. Those are the only two options on the table. And so John just painted this beautiful image of what it's like to stand with the lamb, and they're singing the songs and all the sounds. It's amazing. And I want you guys to hear what the lamb's response is to all the people who are on the other side of the battle. Okay, because that's where this conversation gets interesting, right? It's kind of fun to talk about, there's two battles and the dragon and the lamb, and it's kind of cute and all that stuff. But all of a sudden we realize, no, we're talking actual real life human beings. We're talking people we love and people we care about. And if the option is either you're standing with the lamb or you're standing with the dragon, then you got to ask yourself, man, where am I standing? Where are the people who I love standing? And we talked about this 2 weeks ago. The only people who get to stand on the side of the lamb are people who have been rescued by the lamb. Right? They're good and, you guys remember that? They're good and bad people on both sides. You don't get to be on the side of the lamb because you're a good person. No, you get to be on the side of the lamb because you've been rescued by the lamb. That's the only way possible for you to be on this side. And so we're going to see now how the lamb and how God is responding to all of the people who are on the other side of the battle line. We know the dragon is trying to deceive the people on God's side, but listen to how God responds to all the people who are on the other side. The text says this. John says, and I saw an angel flying in midair, like Clark Kent, I guess, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on earth, every nation, tribe, language, and people. And so what's God's response to the world, to people who are by default or by choice on the side of the dragon? It's to send a messenger to proclaim what? The eternal gospel, right? And so God's like, hey, I got a message for everybody on that side. I want to tell you about the gospel. And this is the message that the angel said. I love this. It says, he said in a loud voice. You guys notice how loud they are in Revelation, right? It's like John has to tell us, like, loud, in a loud voice. It's so funny. Aaron's back there. I had a meeting with Aaron in my office earlier this week. And we were talking. He knows where I'm going with this, right? And we were talking about something confidential that people outside my door. I'm like, hey, man, can you lower your voice? I don't want people to hear this. He's like, okay, yeah, I'll lower my voice. So what happened was I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like, that's your inside voice? I'd hate to hear what your loud voice is. Like I was like, he thought he was whispering and you could hear him down the street. I was like, bro, you need to chill, right? Can we all just pray for Ashley, by the way? She has to live with that every single... If that don't send you to therapy, I don't know what will. But so the angel comes, and this angel is speaking. I don't know what loud for angel is, but obviously it's real loud. And it's loud because he wants people to make sure that we hear what God is trying to say. And this is the message that the angel brought. The angel said this: fear God and give him glory. So that's the message the angel has for the whole earth. Fear God and give him glory. Why? You ready for this? Because the hour of his judgment has come. Don't worship the red dragon, okay? Because those are the only two options. I'm telling you. I know some of you are in the room and you're still trying to figure out if you love Jesus or if you believe in the way of Jesus and what you think about the Bible. We're so glad you're here. I always say you can belong here before you believe, but just so you know, there are only two options on the table. You either worship the lamb or you worship the dragon. And so this angel is coming and going, no. Don't worship the red dragon. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. And we talked about this at our young adult Bible study, but Colossians tells us that all things were made through Jesus and for Jesus. And so what the angel is saying here is like, worship Jesus. Worship the lamb. Worship the creator. Fear God, give him glory. Why? Watch this. He says, because the hour of his judgment has come. Listen, I know we don't like talking about judgment. I'm with you. All right, I've been doing this long enough to know that the moment you start talking about God's wrath and God's judgment, man, we all start to cringe and we get uncomfortable and like, I brought a friend today. Like, we're just like we don't know what to do with it. And I get it. Listen, I get it. I'm with you. I know it's uncomfortable. But for your information, just to put it in context for you, I promise you that when the 47 Christians who were martyred in the Congo a week ago hear and read about God's judgment, they rejoice. I know it sounds crazy, but I promise you that when people who are beaten and persecuted and killed for their faith hear about the hour of judgment coming, it is good news to their ears. And I know, we talked about this in volume 1. I preached about the judgment of God coming, and I talked about how people who are being persecuted rejoice because they know God's a righteous God, and they know that God judging the world means he's going to right every wrong. And I said, when I preached the sermon, that I promise you there are people around the world who think that is good news. I got an email 2 days later from a friend who was a missionary in a war-torn country. And she's like, I just want to affirm what you said. She's like, I just want you to know that when we hear about the judgment of God that's coming on earth, we rejoice. She's like, we're excited because we know that God coming to judge the earth means that God is coming to right every wrong. She's like, we get excited for the same reason that you guys get excited when an earthly judge rules in favor of you when someone has assaulted you. She's like, we rejoice for the same reason you guys get excited when an earthly judge takes someone who's committed murder and puts him away forever. She says, we rejoice that judgment is coming because we know that it means that God's going to right every wrong and he's going to end injustice and he's going to push the darkness back. She said, we don't think that the judgment of God contradicts his love in any way. And I know, again, it makes us uncomfortable. But even in this text, if you would just pause for a second and just zoom out and try and step outside the discomfort you might feel about a God who's coming to judge the earth of all unrighteousness and pay people the consequences of their decision, I promise you that you will see, even in the midst of his judgment, just how merciful and patient he is. Did you notice how he is sending an angel in a loud voice? He's sending a messenger to let the world know that judgment is coming. If he didn't care, he would just sneak up on us. He would be like the cop that's hiding in the corner trying to catch you when you're speeding. Right? You would think God would be like, I ain't telling you. I'm just going to pop up when you don't expect him. Like, aha. But how merciful is this God? How patient is this God that he is sending a messenger? He's like, go let them know. Go tell them in a loud voice. Let them know the judgment is coming. They still have a chance. They can still worship the Lamb. They can change their mind. They can still turn. I can still rescue them. It's not over for you just because you've been on the side of the dragon this whole time. He's like, I can rescue you. If you change your mind, you can now start to worship me. And if that wasn't enough, guess what he does? He sends another messenger. He's like, you want to see how patient and merciful I am? Not only am I going to send one angel or two, I'm going to send 3 angels. And so the first angel comes, and the first angel is like, judgment's coming. Turn, worship God. Verse 8 says, a second angel followed. And this angel had a different message. This angel said, fallen is Babylon the Great. If you're wondering who Babylon the Great is in this text, it depends on who you ask. If you ask the 7 churches that this letter was written, they would have told you that Babylon was code for Rome. Okay, I know some of you guys are tired of the whole historical context thing, but I have to keep going back there because, like we said, the best way to know what the text is trying to tell us in 2025 is to first go back to see what the text was telling them in AD 96. And you can look it up when you get home, but the consensus among theologians is that when they got this letter, Babylon the Great was code for Rome. Now, here's where things get really, really interesting. This angel is prophesying about the fall of Babylon the Great, Rome, at a time in history when nobody thought Rome would ever fall. Like Rome was such a global powerhouse, and Rome offered such security, economic security, and physical security to people that nobody ever thought Rome would fall. And so people were it was so easy for them to put their hope in Rome. It was so easy for them to be like, man, I'm good, man. Like Rome is going to be here forever. And so God, in his mercy, sends an angel, and the angel's going, Rome, it's going to fall. Babylon, he says, the great is going to fall. It's already fallen, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. The message was being presented in a time in history where people would have thought you were crazy if you said Rome was going to fall. It's a little bit like what happened with the Titanic. Anybody remember watching the Titanic? Anybody watch the Titanic in theaters? Right? I mean, it was like 20 years ago that it came out. I didn't even really remember. I had to ask ChatGPT to help me refresh my memory. But there's this series of scenes actually in the movie Titanic, right? Where Jack and Rose, right, they know that water is coming in the thing. And so they go to try and warn people, right? They're trying to warn everybody that, hey, this thing is it's gonna go down. Like we saw water coming in. And how did people respond? They ignored them, right? People acted completely unbothered. Why? Because, quote, this ship cannot sink. Spoiler alert, if you've been under the rock since 1997 and you don't know how this ends. The ship sunk. And people who didn't have to die, died. Right? You guys know how the story ends, you know? And before you ask, I'm just going to throw this out there. It has nothing to do with the sermon. But the answer is yes. They could have both fit on the door, okay? I'm just, selfish Rose should have scooted over. Like, don't tell him not to hold on. Just scooch over and let him just go next to you and you're both saved and live happily ever after. But that's a different conversation for a different day. The point I'm trying to make is that in the same way that people never thought the Titanic was going to sink, nobody thought Rome was going to fall. And so God, in his mercy, it was so easy for people to put their faith and their hope in the state. And so God not only sends angel 1 to come tell people the judgment is coming, but he sends angel 2 to let them know that Rome's going to fall. He sends an angel to let them know that what they're banking in is not going to work. He wanted them to know that when you put your security in anything but the Lamb, it's going to blow up in your face. There is still time. There is still time. And watch this. First angel, second angel. And what does God do in his mercy? Again, I know we get uncomfortable with judgment, but how merciful and how patient is a God who continues to give people chance after chance after chance after. He sends a third angel, a third messenger. And this one followed them, and he went back to the loud voice. And this third angel said, if anybody worships the beast and its image, and receives his mark on their forehead and on their hand. Jim, I know this is not what all the bad 80s, 90s end-time movies portrayed for us on the screen, but we talked about this 2 weeks ago. Being marked on the forehead and on the right hand is not something that only happens to people who worship the beast, right? Because being marked on the forehead and on the arm was a sign of allegiance, and everybody at the end of the day is going to give their allegiance and their worship to something. And so the question is never, are you going to be marked on the hand or on the forehead? No, the question is, whose mark are you going to have on your head and on your forehead? Are you either going to be marked by the beast, or if you go back to verse 1, are you going to have the name of the Father written on your forehead? Ultimately, someone's going to get your allegiance. Your allegiance is either going to be to the Lamb, or it's going to be to the dragon or the enemy. Those are the only two options. And so the third angel comes in and goes, hey, if you worship the beast and receive his mark, in other words, if you give your allegiance and your loyalty and your worship to the beast, here's what's going to happen. It says, they too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured out full strength into the cup of his wrath. They will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and the Lamb. Listen, I'm not pausing for dramatic effect. I'm pausing because this is tragic. This is agonizing. This is sobering. I'm pausing because regardless of where you land, it doesn't matter if you're in the camp of, I believe that this is literal, this is a literal suffering, or if you're in the camp of, I believe this is metaphoric for something else. It really doesn't matter. The one thing we can all agree on is that it ought to break our hearts into a million pieces if this is true, that the angel is saying that this is going to be the lot of everybody who continues to worship the dragon. Again, there's only two options. You've either been rescued by the Lamb or you're on the side of the dragon. And if you decide to give your allegiance to the dragon, the text says this is what is coming for you. You're going to experience the wrath of God that he's going to pour out on the dragon and on the beast, and you get to go down with them. He continues to say this. He says, and the smoke of their torment. This might be the hardest text in the entire Bible. The smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever. There will be no rest, day or night, for those who worship the beast and his image, or for anyone who receives his mark. This, the writer says, calls for patient endurance on the part of God's people who keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus. No rest. Listen, there's no way around this. There's no way around it. There's no way around the severity. Now, if you don't believe it, that's a different conversation. But there's no way around the severity of the judgment and the wrath that the Bible says is coming for the dragon and everybody on the side of the dragon. And you can be uncomfortable with it. I understand that. But just so you know, part of what's happening here is that God is going to do the thing that many of us have been asking him to do for a long time. How many of us have looked at the world and go, man, if there was a good God, if there was a powerful God, if there was a loving God, he will do something about evil. Well, guess what? He's going to do something about evil. And part of what he's going to do is that he's going to forever vanquish the red dragon and the beasts. And everybody who's hitched their wagons to them, unfortunately, are going to go down. There is no way around this in the Bible. And so we're going to have to just go through it. And I want to just take you back briefly to how John begins his letter. I know it's hard for us to reconcile what we're reading with our image of God. And I think part of that is because there's a disconnect in our view of God. And I want to just take you back real quick, if you don't mind.
to Revelation chapter 1 because I think that there is some insight in here that might help us understand what we're reading. Okay, so Revelation chapter 1 is obviously the very first chapter in the whole text. And so John is writing the letter, and he lets us know that it is John, and he's writing to the 7 churches, right? He's setting the stage. He's like, this is why I'm writing this letter. This is what this letter is about. And I want you guys to watch what John says in verse 9. John is now going to tell us why he's writing the letter of Revelation. Okay, you guys with me? Don't miss this. This is massive. He says in Revelation 1, I, John, your brother and companion in the suffering and the kingdom and patient endurance that are ours in Christ Jesus, was in an island of Patmos because of the word of the Lord and the testimony of Jesus. And so John is trying to give us a timestamp for the letter of Revelation. He's like, I was writing this when I was on an island. John is being persecuted. He's been exiled on an island. And so while he's on an island, watch what John says. He says, on the Lord's day, I was in the Spirit. He says, I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet, which said, write on a scroll what you see and send it to the 7 churches. We've talked about this. That's how we know that Revelation is for us, but not to us, right? He's like, write to the church in Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. That's why John is writing Revelation, because Jesus told him to write it. That's why the words are in red. Is it Jesus speaking? And I want you guys to listen to what happens next. John says, I turned around to see the voice that was speaking, which is interesting because you don't really see a voice. But he's like, I turned around and I wanted to see the voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned, he says, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And among the lampstands were someone like the Son of Man, that's Jesus, dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet with a golden sash around his waist. Watch this. He says the hair on his head was white. Here we go again. He's seeing things that he can't describe. And so he's got to compare it to something that he's familiar with. He said the hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow. And his eyes, can you imagine, were like a blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace. And his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. Coming out of his mouth was a sharp double-edged sword. This is my favorite. He says his face was like the sun shining in all his brilliance. I know there's so many layers to the conversation about judgment and wrath and eternal separation. I know that I'm not going to solve all the tension this morning, but I just want to propose for your consideration that I think the reason a lot of us have such a hard time with the severity of God's judgment and wrath when he comes on the last day is because our view of Jesus is so small. And consequently, our view of ourselves is too big. I heard a preacher say it so well one time. He was talking about how big God was and how small we are in comparison. And someone said, Pastor, why are you trying to make me feel small? And he said, I'm not trying to make you feel small. I'm trying to tell you that you are small. Notice how when John, the beloved disciple, sees Jesus in all his brilliance, he doesn't dap him up or give him a high five or give him a fist bump. John says, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. John's like, I'm dead. It's over for me. If you're wondering why John fell at the feet of Jesus as though dead, it's the same reason why some of you think you're going to die on a hot summer day if you don't have sunscreen, sunglasses, and an umbrella. Okay, and no shame if you never thought about it this way before. But think about it. If the sun can give you blisters and sunburn from 93 million miles away, what do you think will happen when you have to face the one who opened his mouth and 2 trillion galaxies appeared? Not 2 trillion stars, 2 trillion galaxies, each with millions of stars, appeared. No wonder John fell on his face when he saw Jesus. Are you kidding me? Who can stand before a God that big, that holy and that righteous. I'll tell you who. Only the people who have been covered by the Lamb who died on the cross for their sins will be able to stand in the shadow of the Lamb before a holy and righteous God when he comes back. Everybody else will be on their own. And they will have to face his judgment. And yes, it's heartbreaking. Yes, it's agonizing. Yes, it is tragic. But you guys, that's part of why every chance we get, we take the time to remind you that you are missionaries where you live, work, and play. God has entrusted to you and I the message of hope. And so you may not like the judgment of God, but there is still time. There is still time. People can still turn. People can still be saved. And so God is looking at the church going, hey, will you tell them? Will you take the message of hope to the people who have been deceived by the dragon? Will you tell them to fear God and give him glory and worship not the dragon, but the one who made the heavens and the earth and the sea? There's no way around the severity of his judgment. But there's a way through it. And for a lot of people, there is a way out of it. The Lamb provided that 2,000 years ago when he died on a cross. And we have been given the message of hope to share with a dying world. Jesus is coming soon. Come on now, I know we've been saying that for 2,000 years, but it is sooner than it's ever been in the history of the world. Jesus is coming soon. And when he comes, it will be a day unlike any day in the history of the world. Yes, he's going to judge the world. But guess what else he's going to do when he comes? Guess what else Jesus is going to do? He's going to wipe the tears from our eyes. And he's going to right every wrong. And he's going to end injustice. He's going to cancel death. He's going to cancel cancer. He's going to cancel depression. He's going to cancel anxiety. We're not going to need the sun anymore because the Bible says the glory of his face will light up the world. And then he's going to invite all of us to join with the elders and the four living creatures who fall in the presence of a holy God and sing the song of salvation. Jesus is coming soon.